help me with. My apologies. Okay, so excellent. We got clear on how we do the polling. So as Ginger said, we've got a chat box. Here's my one question as we get going in the chat box, just to make sure everybody's there. If you joined us a minute or two late, no worries. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a little chat icon. Just open that up, and here is the question I want you to answer. Where are you calling in from? You can say a city, a state, a country, a room in your home, as many of us are working from our houses. Ginger and I are just south of Salt Lake City, Utah. Our claim to fame is we had the great opportunity in 2002 to host the Winter Olympics. So that's where we're calling in from. It looks, boy, we got people from all over the world, it looks like. I saw Switzerland there, New Jersey, Egypt. Hey, welcome. Good to have you here. Well, hey, I think that's good on the tools. Let's go ahead and jump in to kind of what we're trying to do as we get going today. So as I start here, let me do one more poll question. The question is this. You've come to an earnings call course where you're going to learn how to listen to these earnings calls. My question is what's your experience around these? When's the last time you had the opportunity to listen to an earnings call? Go and put that, answer that. For some, it was this year, maybe it was last year. Boy, it's been a while. That's okay. By the way, it's 100% anonymous. If you've never participated in an earnings call, go ahead and select number D. Or number E, I'd rather go and go to the dentist listening to these earnings calls. Now, for some of you, you may be part of a publicly traded company where you have these every quarter. For others, maybe it's a smaller company and you're here because you want to look at maybe some of your customers, those you're selling into. Some of you might be saying, Brent, it's not customers. I want to understand my competitor better and how we can kind of compete better. And then for some of us, you just may have an interest, whether it be your personal investments, et cetera. So as I look at the answers there, it looks like a number of you have gone through that. About 12% haven't ever gone through that. Well, no worries. Whether you're a seasoned professional at these earnings call or you're brand new to these, the tools, the process we're going to talk you through in the next, let's call it 55 minutes or so, is going to help you to be more comfortable around these and be more successful at capturing that data. You know, it's interesting. Publicly traded companies are required by law to submit to the Security Exchange Commission here in the United States on a quarterly basis their financial performance. It's a quarterly report that they submit. Now, majority of these companies will take that time. They're not required, but majority of them by far will take that time to do what they call an earnings call, where they get a chance to communicate to the market how their results for the quarter, what opportunities they have, and kind of guidance looking forward. And these calls are a great way for people to understand their business strategy as well as their the financial performance around their key metrics. Well, here's what's kind of interesting. As you look at this, here's a statistic that may or may not surprise you. Even though we have these on a quarterly basis, 95% of employees don't understand company strategy. This comes from a Harvard study around how much information do employees truly understand. Here's another stat that's kind of interesting. 90% of employees don't understand their company's important business metrics. So we have these opportunities to listen, and more than 50, or about 50% of you are listening. But then even when I listen to them, there's a lot of terminology. There's a lot of metrics they share. And I may or may not be tracking even though I'm listening to them. Well, so that's a challenge. Imagine you're the CEO, and this month we're looking at Boeing. David Calhoun, CEO of Boeing. Imagine you're the CEO of Boeing, and here's what you're dealing with. You've got your largest aerospace company in the world, America's biggest manufacturer and exporter, more than 153,000 employees. That's actually been updated this year. 26,000 employees have been given severance this year. And I'll talk about why in a moment. But you've got a very large employee base located in more than 65 countries, providing airplanes all throughout the world, technologies, other things. And think of those two statistics. You're the CEO of a company, 95% of your employees potentially, maybe higher, maybe lower, but a large percent don't understand your key strategies. 90% of employees don't even understand the key metrics and how you can impact those metrics. Well, the title of our program is What the CEO Needs You to Know in Business. What do you think? You're David Calhoun, you're dealing with global pandemic that's had a huge impact on the airline industry, which obviously impacts your ability to sell new planes, you're in a tough spot. What do you think Mr. Calhoun needs their employees to know? What about his customers to know? Shareholders who expect a return on their investment. And then very important to them, in fact, they talked about in the call, is their partners, their suppliers, etc. That's why we're here today. What is it they need us to know? They need us to understand our key metrics and measures. They need us to understand the strategic direction and how we, within our individual roles, can have an impact on that. Well, folks, that's why you're here today. We're going to take you through a simple process. Within this process, I'll give you 2 tools that will help you get both the strategic direction of a company as well as the financial performance, how they're scoring or how they're doing. I'm going to wrap that up in an application tool that says, okay, now based upon this knowledge, what are you going to do about that? And here is my guarantee to you. Whether you've been through our program or this is the first time you've interacted with us, my guarantee is this. As you do this, as you take this tool, and my recommendation at the minimum is the next 2 to 3 earnings calls for your company, a competitor, a customer, or somebody you're just interested in, go through the process. And my guarantee is this: if you do that 2 to 3 quarters consecutive, you will build your credibility as a business, not just as a functional leader, but as a business leader within your company. You'll build your career and possibly have a significant impact on your company. That's what this knowledge helps you to do. So often, as I said, as employees, we're functionally brilliant. You're very good at what you do, but often we kind of go through like this with blinders on. What this tool allows you to do is step back for a moment, once a quarter, get clarity around a strategy, purpose, direction, financial metrics, etc. Then go back into your functional role and say, okay, based upon what I've learned, what can I do to impact that? So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so with that guarantee, let's jump into the process. 3 steps, very basic. You got to prepare, then you go into the experience, you analyze, and then you've got to apply. So let's start with the preparation. Before I do that, as I said, I kind of hit a little bit of this. These calls happen on a quarterly basis. For those that are new, there's typically two parts to every call. There's what they call the prepared remarks, and this is where the executives take the time to kind of share their information. They submit kind of their financial performance, and they say, well, let me talk about revenue. Why is it up or down? What's going on with that? What about my profitability? What's happening there? Hey, look at these new assets I'm developing for future deployment, and what are the things I did in the quarter that worked well? What are the opportunities for improvement, and how are we going to attack those? It's a great chance for them to give their perception of what's going on. Now, the second part then shifts where analysts have an opportunity to ask questions. Now, these analysts are part of these large financial institutions where they go and they research a company and industry, et cetera, and then they write a report that goes back to investors to help make decisions about their portfolios and their investment strategies. The typical time is somewhere between about 40 minutes. Some of them could be up to an hour and a half as far as that communication. But it's a great way to kind of capture what's going on. Now, if you want to just understand the basics of the company, the first part where the executive speaks is a great starting point. But if you really want to understand how the market's viewing it, you definitely want to listen to those Q&A, because that's where you get to see where the market's kind of buying into what they're saying and where the market is saying, wait a second. The tenor, the tone of communication, the questions they ask, help you to see kind of where the market's saying, I can see that, and where the market might be saying, hey, help me get some clarity around that. So it's a great way to, that's the call itself. So what do you do in the preparation stage? There's 3 steps. First, you got to locate the call, or maybe if it's after the call, get access to the transcript. You got to review your notes from past calls. You got to meet with your team. So let me talk about those real quickly. The locating the call is quite easy. There's a great website I'm sure you're familiar with. It's called Google. You should be seeing that on your screen as I'm sharing that. If you're not, Ginger, let me know that. But all you're going to do is you're going to type in Boeing, spell it right, 2020 Q3 earnings. Something as simple as that. It could just be Boeing earnings. You can get to it. But I click on that, and it's going to give me a laundry list of information. Now, one of the tips I would give you is look for their investor pages. So stuff like this, that's going to get you the more kind of accurate information. You start going to like CNBC, Motley Fool, some of these, they're great as fun, but you're also getting a little bit of spin. So I like to go right to their website. So I click on this one right here, and boom, I'm there. Now, if you want to do a different way, you come in here, you hit, you look for their investor page, you can find all that. But Google does a great job. Now, what are you looking for when you get there? Well, if it's pre-call, all you're going to have is a link to register for the call. So if I click on this, I go in. If I haven't ever registered, it's going to come up with a registration, and I can go ahead and do the registration, and then I'm ready to go. Now, in the case like a Boeing here, they've already had the call. So I can actually go in and register, and they'll listen to the recording as well if you want to do that. Now, if it's after the call, transcripts is the way to go, in my opinion. It's a great way to kind of get the call in a kind of a form I can go at my own pace. Rather than have to listen to an hour, I may be able to read faster and kind of capture what's going on. Now, not all companies have a transcript. Here at Boeing, they do. They click on that, and here you go. You got word for word what was communicated in the call, who spoke, what they said, all the way through the analyst questions and what happens there. So that's called the transcript. If you don't do that, you can do that same Google search, and instead of just add to Boeing's 2020 Q3 earnings, just put earnings transcript. And there's multiple companies that provide that. It's a great resource for you. And then finally, some companies actually put together a presentation. Now, what I love, if they have a presentation, I like to get it. Here's why. They do a great job of kind of summarizing what they said in the call in these slides. And I'll hit a couple of these points here. They share what happened by segment, for example. Here are their commercial airplanes. What happened here? You'll see the big impact of what happened there. They'll talk about their defense and space. So it's a great little resource to capture a lot of data at one space. So by way of review, you got to access the call. How are you going to do that? You're going to go to Google. If it's pre-call, you register, and you just, on the day of, you then log into the call. If it's post-call, you can go and listen to the recording or look for a transcript. And if you don't get a transcript there, search for transcript, and there's a number of websites, Seeking Alpha, Motley Fool, others that provide transcripts you can get access to. If you can find a slide deck, that's probably the third thing I think is quite valuable in this process. So folks, that is how we get access to it. So once you've located or prepare, what do you do there? If you listen to the call before, the next step is review your notes from the prior call. What did they say in Q2? In preparation to listen to the call in Q3. Now, if you haven't listened to it, you can do that same process I talked about locating. As I said, they record it. So if I wanted to do the Q2, do the same thing. Boeing Q2 earnings, and I'm going to go to the same website, and it's going to have a Q2 recording I can look at. As you do these multiple times, though, the notes you take from this, you just bring them up, review them, and you're ready to go on that call. The last thing I recommend is meet with your team. Now, what I would suggest is everything from in preparation, get together before, maybe even review your notes if you'd like, but meet with your team as you go through the process. Here's my recommendation. It's great for your personal development just to do it on your own, but if you have colleagues, if you're an individual contributor, just find some colleagues. Hey, let's do this together. If you're a supervisor, bring your team together. It's a great way to kind of get everybody on the same page of what's going on in your company, your competitors, your customers, or those you want to invest in. Folks, that's the preparation phase. 3 steps: locate the call or transcript, review your notes from past calls, meet with your team. So the meat of the conversation today is around how do you analyze it? How do you take what your executive's talking about that at times may feel like a foreign language, etc.? How do I kind of take that and distill it into something I can apply? Well, let me share some tools. First of all, as a framework, and for those that have been with us, you're going to help me as we kind of do a quick review on this framework for those that are new. Here at Acumen Learning, we provide business and financial acumen customized. We help employees understand how their companies make money and how decisions are made around the money-making process. A little later today, I'll share a little bit more. A key framework around what we focus is 5 fundamental drivers every company's focused on. Here's the 5 drivers: cash, profit, assets, growth, and people. What I'd suggest to you is that as our executives are talking, everything they talk about kind of boils down to these 5 drivers. Now, you'll notice the foundation of these 5 drivers are the 3 financial statements. When people think business or financial acumen, they think the financials. Here's what I'd say about the financials. Think of the financials like a scoreboard. You walk into a gymnasium. How do you say that? I'm from Idaho. Sorry, a little tongue-tied there. Gymnasium, and you see a scoreboard. Maybe it's a basketball game. You see a scoreboard and you know who won or lost. Well, you can see that in the statement, whether we're profitable or not. But in order to really understand, it's the score. You got to get behind the numbers, and that's what understanding strategy, the performance, etc. So the 5 drivers really helps you get a deeper dive in what's going on in the business. So a quick review of these 5 drivers is, let me take you through them. So when we talk in the class, for all my graduates, please get your chat box open. For all my graduates, when we talk about cash, we talk about how important. There's a common phrase, cash is blank. Fill in the blank for me, if you would. Everybody's been through the cash? Absolutely. Cash is queen, and let's make sure cash is queen, however you want to describe it. In fact, some suggest that cash is the company's oxygen supply. Now, this is vitally important for Boeing right now. Cash is the company's oxygen supply. What does that mean? If I run out of cash, I die in business. They call it bankruptcy, okay? Now, as you look at Boeing, you got transportation's dropped dramatically. You have all these airlines that they've cut their travel significantly, in some cases 90% at the initial kickoff of the pandemic. So all of a sudden you've got this reduction. So demand for your products dropped dramatically. Well, you can withstand that as long as you have cash. Now, there's basically 5 ways you or I can impact cash. Anything I can do to grow my revenue or reduce my expenses, assuming we collect those dollars, will eventually become cash. Anything I can do to collect faster on receivables, money that people owe us. Anything I can do to pay slower will help me to hold on to my cash, has a positive impact on cash. And the last one is inventory, how you manage your inventory. As you look at Boeing, one of the big challenges is they have 450 airplanes that are sitting on the ground that they can't deliver or weren't able to deliver until the 18th of this month, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So cash is king, vitally important in business. And during the pandemic, you'll hear companies talk a lot about cash when they're having tough times. When things are going well, you won't hear much about cash. For those of us who were with us with Amazon a couple times ago, Amazon's generating a tremendous amount of cash. They're not talking a lot about cash. You go back to ExxonMobil, which we looked at earlier this year, when oil price dropped as dramatically as it did, cash was a big deal. So cash is king. It's an oxygen supply of a company. Well, let's talk profitability. For those that are in my class, test and knowledge, there's 2 fundamental ways we can impact profitability, which to increase something and or decrease something. Anybody remember what those were? What were the 2 levers I had to impact profitability from the course? Okay, increased sales, and also known as revenue. Look at you guys are rock stars. Increased revenue, sales, my top line sometimes it's referred to. The way I do that is 2 ways, either higher pricing or sell more, what they call volume. The second is to reduce cost. Now, in this group, I imagine we hear a lot about cost reduction. That's the key lever because that's seen as quite controllable. But that's our levers. Anything I do to grow my revenue while reducing expenses. Profitability is an accounting measure. It's whether or not the revenue minus expense creates profitability in the business. So a key metric you'll hear them talk about. Some of the metrics we talked about in the course might be stuff like gross profit, operating profit or operating income, EBIT, earnings before interest and tax, EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, and then of course, net profit is a key metric companies will look at. That one is one that gets a lot of time and attention in publicly traded companies. So assets, when we talk about assets, it represents, when you think assets, think anything they own or control which has value. That's the financial definition as to what goes on your balance sheet. Just everybody can do this chat. In the chat box, what do you think Boeing own or controls which has value? Put that in the chat box. What does Boeing own or control which has value? You don't have to be an expert on this. But what do they own or control? Yeah, absolutely. Planes, real estate, IP, intellectual property, plants, absolutely. A lot that they own. And so as you look at that, one of the key factors you look at from an asset perspective is how financially strong is a company versus what they call asset strength versus how are they utilizing those assets to grow, to expand, actually the 2 prior drivers, profit and cash. That's what they call asset utilization. And if you think about a teeter-totter, the relationship from asset strength, and asset utilization is kind of like that. As asset strength goes up, utilization goes down. As asset utilization goes up, strength goes down. How much cash do I hold on my balance sheet to withstand a pandemic versus how much do I take and invest in new projects, new opportunities, etc.? That's a balancing act that every company deals with. And depending on where you're at in the market or what's going on in the industry or global economy, you can see huge deployment of utility to take advantage of an opportunity where strength may, a lot of borrowing, et cetera, which you might see a little hit on your strength. But the expectation is when I get on the other side of that, I'm going to generate so much fun, it's going to make up for that initial investment, which allows me to pay down my debt and then strengthen my balance sheet, et cetera. So there's a balance that's going on constantly in companies. And when the pandemic hit for Boeing, there was a huge focus on we got to strengthen our balance sheet. We got to get access to cash because guess what? We've gone through an issue with one of our planes, and now we're dealing with a pandemic. We got to make sure we have enough cash to survive. So growth is the next driver. When we talk about growth, this one gets a tremendous amount of time and attention from publicly traded companies. And it has to do because they're publicly traded. As you invest your dollars, what do you want your dollars to do? You want them to grow. Absolutely. And so that one gets a lot of time and attention on these calls. Where are you going to see growth? How quickly will that growth happen? And Boeing got a lot of pressure around that. Hey, you've kind of you've been grounded on a certain plane. When are you going to get that out? When are we going to start to be able to deliver so you can actually generate cash and profitability for the company? When are we going to start seeing growth from you? Of course, the core of the model, what's key, and this is my belief all in on this, the core of any business is people. When we talk about people, what are we talking about? We're talking about the customers that buy and use our product or services. We're talking about the partners that we work with to provide those products or services. We're talking suppliers that help us and support us. We're also talking about internally. How do we as employees, different departments come together and get greater execution? So people are what makes it happen. They have an impact on all five of them. Well, folks, that's a simple rundown. For those that haven't been exposed to our five driver, that's how we look at the business. As you start to think about business through these five lens, what you start to do is you start to be able to capture information and kind of consolidate it into usable, applicable action items you can focus on. So we use that as a tool to help you to get to the strategy of the business. And here's the tool. It's called the Executive Alignment Tool, and here's how it works. Understand those five drivers. As you're listening to these calls, or if you have the transcript as you're reading through it, every time you see them talk about cash, you put a little slash mark. Every time they talk about profitability, you put a little slash mark. At the end of that, you're then going to answer the four questions on the right-hand side. So don't worry. If you're new to this, you haven't been to the class, we give you a definition on each of the five drivers. You don't have to memorize what I just walked through, but it gives you, what do we mean by cash? Not only that's what I love about the tool, it also gives you what I call trigger words. Those words you're going to hear in conversations that immediately tell you they're talking about cash. Sources and uses of cash, dividends, I'm deploying more cash to my investors. Stock buyback, I'm paying cash to buy back stock. So those are some of the kind of trigger words you're looking for. So the first part of this exercise, you go through, listen to the call. Every time as they're talking, start marking this up. Eventually you get through the call and you jump to the questions on the right-hand side. And you answer these four questions. The first question, which business driver seems to get the most attention and why? I love the second part of this question, why? Why is Boeing talking so much about cash right now? Why are they talking so much about asset? Well, they have one of their major new planes that's been grounded. They're dealing with a pandemic where air traffic has dropped dramatically. Their customers are coming back and getting out of contracts, saying, look, or either getting out of them or delaying them. I don't want that airplane until 2021, or in some cases 2022. So all of a sudden you produced all this and you can't get it out the door. So those factors obviously impact which of the five drivers they're focusing on. What are the two or three main points the executive was trying to make is the next question. What are the goals, trends, or objectives? They get to a point in the call where they start talking guidance. What's going to happen in Q4? What's going to happen next year? What's the overall market going to do? Their perspective on it. And then finally, because it's an earnings call, the last question, what key questions or concerns were raised by the analyst community? What are they talking about? Where are they questioning? Now, of course, if you use this and it's not an earnings call, you just skip the last question. That's the tool called the executive alignment. Well, here's what I want to do. I'll take a few minutes and we're going to walk through a few quotes from the call and just walk you through how to do that. I'm going to need your participation, so go ahead and get your chat box ready to go. But here is my quote. This is from their CEO, David Calhoun. So I'm going to read it, and then you tell me in the chat box which driver on that first sentence. Here it is. This one's a little difficult. You may have to kind of work through this one a little bit with me. The pandemic is having broad and deep impacts across the globe on health, on the economy, on trade, and of course, our travel industry. So let's stop there. What do you see? Well, John is saying people, growth, people. We're seeing people. Yeah, definitely. When you start talking global health, the economy has some impacts on people. And then, of course, growth, the ability to grow, right? It's having an impact. He's not saying it's having a great positive impact. We're seeing huge numbers like we heard in Amazon, which, by the way, Q3, for those that were on that call, had more revenue generated than Q2 of this year. And that revenue in Q2 was greater than they did in their whole fourth quarter of last year, which is by far their biggest quarter. So the two of their slower quarters were their top quarters that they ever have done. What do you think they're going to do in Q4? So that's an industry that it's had a huge impact, but it's a positive, a lot of growth versus the airline industry going the other way. So definitely, those are some of those things. Let's go to the next sentence. We're focused on health, safety of our employees and the communities while working closely with customers and suppliers to navigate through the global pandemic to rebuild stronger on the other side. Now that one's a little easier. Yeah, we're getting a lot of people for sure. Maybe some other things, but a lot of people. I got my employees, I got the communities, and I've got my customers, all very focused. And then finally, the last one. There's no doubt that this moment is among the most difficult in our more than 100-year history. Through it all, I remain confident in Boeing's long-term future. So the building stronger growth, this actually, that second question, remember what the 2 or 3 key messages, this could potentially be part of a key message as well. That yes, we're going through one of the most difficult times in our 100-year history, but guess what? We're confident in the long-term future viability of our business. It's not like airline travel is going away for good, but it's going to take time. In fact, they're suggesting it'll take 3 years to kind of get back to where they were, our travel behaviors, where we were in 2019. So a couple of years still to get there. Okay, well, guys, you guys are doing a great job of kind of how to do this. That's how it is. Now, one of the things I'll share with you, it's not an exact science. What do I mean by that? You and I may not get the exact same number of cash items or profit items, etc. That being said, I've done this hundreds of times with different groups. Invariably, the top 2 or 3 drivers rise to the top. So let me do another one. Here's the quote, and I'm not going to read through it. You just do it. Kind of go through it on your own. Put in the chat box what you're seeing. This comes from Greg Smith, their CFO at Boeing. What did he talk about in his call? Which drivers? Okay, we're seeing a lot of cash. Absolutely. And I'll kind of highlight as you bring up some of the things that I'm seeing as well. Starting back in the middle of March is the potential risk of virus escalate. We took a proactive step to fully draw down a loan of $13.8 billion. They're seeing this pandemic and saying cash is king. It's my oxygen supply. I got to make sure. So they borrowed $13.8 billion at that point. What else did you have there? People, we get some people stuff in there. Let me keep going. Given the uncertainty in markets at the time, we understood that it was a prudent step to bring cash. Yeah, there's cash again. Boy, when they say the word, that's an easy one. Suspend our dividend. Now that's a people one. Some of you guys kind of said people because investors, do they like it when they suspend dividends? No. So that's going to have an impact. But why are they doing it? Because cash is key. If your oxygen supply was all of a sudden to disappear, you would do some crazy stuff to access oxygen, would we not? Excellent. You got a number of stuff in there. Cash is in there. People's in there. Next year, we rolled out our first voluntary. So people, again, they did a layoff program, voluntary opportunities. They see other ones they have to do. cash. So a lot of cash, a lot of people. Obviously, this could impact our profitability, some of the other ones as well. Let me do one last one. This comes from an investor. What do you see in this one? Great question. Quinn's asking, where do bonds fall? Assets or cash? Cash definitely, right? Because I'm issuing a bond to get cash to come in. So that's going to be, but absolutely, you're building that bond off of your asset strength, the strength of your business. So it could be both, but definitely cash for sure. So as we look at this, we're seeing cash, profitability. Yeah, when you hear margins, where was the margin? Somewhere in here it says margins, right there. When you hear margins, I want you to immediately think profitability. Profit margins is what they're talking about. Of course, he's talking about cash in here. As we talk about cash flow right there. Anyways, growth is down here. So a lot of different vibe drivers. Well, folks, that's how you do it. Now, if you're doing that, the call itself, sometimes, like I said, somewhere between about 40 minutes to an hour and a half. Most of them are typically around an hour. You can just look at the prepared remarks of the executives and get a good feel for that. I highly recommend looking at the analysts as well. But in about an hour, you'll get a lot of these numbers. And I did. I went ahead and finished it for you, okay? So I went through it, the whole call, and here's what I found. Now, one of the things you'll notice on mine is I kind of separate the prepared remarks, what they say, and then Q&A. And it's not just what the analysts asked, but how they responded. What did our executive team say? So everything over here includes both analysts as well as our response answers. Now, of course, you add them all up and you'll notice assets and people were the top two. But this one is right there neck and neck. And even with this one as high as it is, that's pretty high. All four of these are pretty high, with definitely assets being high. The highest in people from my perspective. So let's go to the questions. Now that I've done that, here's what I do. I start with the first question. Which business driver seems to get the most attention and why? Well, let me give you some information. March of 2019, the FAA grounded Boeing for their 737 MAX. You may or may not remember that. They had 2 accidents killing 350 people with their 737, to where the FAA comes back and says, you're grounded. That plane can no longer fly. So any of their customers who had purchased that plane had to ground those planes. And then all the backlog of production that they're doing had to be grounded. And the big focus for the last 18 months, over 4,000 hours flown, 14,000 flights, is to get the technology, everything to where it can, what they call return to service, or the abbreviation they use is RTS. At the time of this call, they did not have that. They had 450 737 sitting in their inventory that they couldn't deploy. Now imagine that. You're producing this product. We'll go back to Tesla. We looked at it a few months ago. You're producing all these Teslas and all of a sudden you can't deliver them. You can't. So what's happened? I'm not getting that cash coming in. The majority of their cash payment comes once they deliver the plane itself. So definitely, what's going on with that asset? Is it safe? Is it all this? All the questions around when are you going to be able to deploy it? What's happening? What new technology from an asset? There's a lot of conversation. Of course, the second part of that's impacted from an asset deployment and selling of their aircraft are COVID impacts on customer travel. This was a quote. Impacts on the commercial travel has been devastating. One of the stats they shared, or one of their customers shared, was at one point 90% reduction in travel. And they're forecasting that travel won't come back to kind of pre-COVID, so 2019 levels, for 3 years. So huge impacts on their business. Now, one bright spot is the government spending around buying their jets, their F-15s, or I can't remember which ones it was, but that's been a bright spot. But a lot about, so if you're not selling as much, you've got all this equipment, you've got all these buildings. What do you do? Okay, we're going to consolidate this manufacturing into one location around the 737. And there's just a lot of conversations around assets for sure. As you look at the people driver, of course, COVID was a big deal. That has an impact on their employees, their customers, safety, regulations, estimated 3 years before they'll get back to that. So huge impact. This is an industry of all that I've looked at this year has been tremendously devastated by the pandemic. You combine that with grounding of one of your key airplanes, it's kind of the perfect storm for them to be in a tough spot. Now, one of the things I like is they give these overarching slides that give you kind of overview. So it's kind of what's happening. Some of the stuff we talked about, airplane deliveries are down. You see these numbers right here, the impacts that they're having, but kind of what are they doing about it? Well, we think the stable global demand for defense and space, that's going well. COVID-19 continues to have an impact on our travel, but here's some of our kind of recovery continues, but remains slow and uneven. What are we seeing as far as when are we going to see numbers back to where it's about 3 years? So what I like is it kind of summarizes some of those key messages that they kind of communicated on the call itself. So let's jump to those key messages. Here you go. Some of the things that stood out to me, obviously, COVID-19 at 737 is having this significant impact on Boeing. It's so bad that they have what they call negative cash flow. For those that can't remember from the course, or for those that are new, this is what cash flow is. It's the difference between all the actual cash that comes into a company from providing our products or services, minus the cash that goes out for providing those products or service. It's a net dollar amount. It shows up on your cash flow statement. I'll show you a little bit later. And every company wants to have that positive, meaning the difference between what the cash that came in a period of time minus the cash goes out, I want that positive. Boeing is negative in the tens of billions of dollars in the first 9 months of this year. But even last year in 2019, it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. It's negative because of the grounding of their 737. It is the perfect storm to impact their business. Thus, the reason they went out and draw upon that line of credit of 13.8 billion total amount, about 25 billion they've got access to in the first 9 months of this year to help do this right here, preserve their liquidity. When you hear liquidity, they're talking cash there. They've got, again, they got a bunch of planes they got to deploy. They can't make any until they actually get them out and they start to get paid. So liquidity, cash is vitally important for them. What they're doing to transform the business based upon that. If it's 3 years before you're going to get to the size of organization that you've built out to in 2019, it's going to be 3 years before you get there. You can't survive just by borrowing on that. You've got to restructure, look at your infrastructure, look at your overhead. What about where you invest your dollars? What about the supply chain? That's a big impact for them, and they talked a lot about it, is their suppliers. As Boeing gets hit, what about all those that supply jet engines for them or other equipment or other parts? Those companies are getting impacted as well. And do they have the ability to get access to liquidity to withstand a big drop that we're seeing? Of course, operational excellence in the new normal. How do we make sure we've got a good process there? And then one of the key main points I got out of this is that research reinforces that travel is safe. It's interesting. It's not just the COVID that's concerning to people that are impacting our travel, but it's also the way we do business today. Now we've been forced into this virtual environment. Some companies were ahead of schedule, been doing a lot of virtual meeting and that type of, but a lot of companies haven't. But now we're comfortable. We know it can work. How is that going to impact the industry in future? Will we still do all these travel meetings? Will that all happen? That's kind of an interesting thing to think about, talk about, etc. Well, let's jump. Oh, this is another slide, kind of speaks to those same things. I won't bore you with this, but it's many of what I said. Probably the only unique thing that I'd say is this specificity around kind of 4 areas they're focusing on from a restructuring perspective. I love this from VJ. He says, a long time ago, one of my bosses advised, follow the money. So I started looking at the balance sheet of companies before joining. This advice worked out very well for me. I worked in the airline domain for many years before I switched to the healthcare insurance domain. Yeah, follow the money, follow the cash. Cash is king. Whatever that quote you like, absolutely will help you understand what's going on in this business. In fact, one more just to reinforce VJ's comment is Warren Buffett, when he talks about investing in a company, the number one number he looks at is that cash flow number. Is it positive and is it increasing? So what were the goals and objectives as they move forward? Transform the business. We already talked about that. Cash is king. We got to make sure we have that, make sure we can survive this, get on the other side of it. return to service. And that happened November 18 of this year. They FAA approved for return to service. And I think it was just yesterday or a couple days ago, United took the first 737 of that 450 that was in their on the ground, in their assets, right, in their inventory. Look to increase efficiency in all aspects of the business. So what are the analysts saying? Significant inventory on the grounds. They're really asking, when are those going to go out? How many of them this year? How many next year? What they're trying to get to, when are we going to start getting to cash flow positive? In fact, that was one of the questions. And they said their best guess would be end of 2021 into 2022 before they'll be cash flow positive. That's the reason they're borrowing so much. Cash flow from operation, when will it become positive? I said that. Market share. As they're struggling through this, one of their key planes, the 737, has been grounded. Obviously, Airbus and other competitors can pick up some of that market share. And then, of course, capacity usage. You know, what are we going to do with all these manufacturing areas where we don't have the same demand for our products? We don't need that space. But we're saying 3 years ago, we'll start to get back. So what do you do in the meantime? Do you change a lease? Do you adapt, et cetera? Thus the reason a lot of assets conversation. Well, folks, that's how it works. You walk through that call, and in a very short period of time, you can walk through completing these questions. Now I've got some data. I've got some information. Now what I want to do is say, okay, well, that they're telling me the kind of the challenges, strategic challenges, what they're trying to do about it. Let me see if the numbers give me any additional insight. That's this tool here. It's called the Navigating the Financials. Everybody that's been in our class, you'll be familiar with those. For those that are new, here's how it works. The 5 drivers are on the side of the document. So it incorporates the 5 drivers, the 3 financial statements, and the key metric measures into one place. What I've got here are some of the more common key metrics that most companies focus on. Now, each industry will have a little nuance of additional metrics, but these are the most common metrics companies look at. So you don't have to have a CFO degree or be a CFO to understand how to do this. This kind of walks through and gives you all of it in one place. So it tells you, if you want to figure out how much cash your company's carrying, the line item you're going to look for is the cash and cash equivalent. The genius of this tool, in my opinion, is right here. You don't have to memorize where it is. It tells you where to go. If I want to find where the cash and cash equivalent for Boeing is, I'm going to go to the balance sheet. If I want to see their cash flow, I want to see the cash flow statement. So again, just taking this tool and 3 financial statements, you can then look at. Now, if you don't remember or if you don't know what these metrics are, come join one of our courses, or do the online training, or just search Google. What is cash and cash equivalent again? And that can help you get a better clarity of what those numbers mean, why they're important, et cetera. There's some great resources out there. So here's what I want to do. I want to practice using this, and you're going to help me. You don't have the statements in front of you. I'm going to show you the statement. We're going to do the first 5 together. What you're going to find, they're going to go pretty quickly. So we got to get the cash and cash equivalent for Boeing. And I want you to tell me in the chat box, just to make sure we're using it all, everybody's comfortable with the tool, where am I going to go to find it? Using my chat box, tell me, what statement do I go to find the cash and cash equivalent? Okay, there you go. Balance. If you don't remember what balance, it's the balance sheet. So here it is. I've got the balance sheet. For those that were in my class, you'll remember that we from an accounting perspective, you list them by most liquid down to least liquid. So liquid means how quickly they can convert to cash. So put in the chat box, how much cash and cash equivalents did Boeing have at September 30th, 2020? Put it in the chat box. How much cash and cash equivalent, most liquids can be right up here. There you go. It's $10,564 million. So I can go back and put it on the sheet, but just by way of reminder, because maybe you've been through the class, many companies, if they have more cash than they need in the short term, they'll take that and put it in what they call short term or other investments. This cash up here is either already cash or will convert to cash in 90 days. This cash is cash that's going to convert back to cash in greater than 90 days, but less than a year period of time. So often when you hear executives talk about cash, they'll combine those two. So it's closer to that 26 billion if you look at that number. But if you just look at the cash and cash equivalent, 10,564 million. We all got that. Well, let's jump to the cash flow, and just in the chat box, again, practicing using the tool. What statement do I've got to look for? Put in the chat box. There you go. It's the cash flow statement. Absolutely. So let's jump there. Cash flow statement, they're broken up into three sections. The cash they generated from their core business, what we call cash from operations. Cash flow from investing, where did I deploy that to grow and maintain my assets? And then what happened from a financing, debt or equity financing? The line item we're looking for is net cash provided by operating activities. Put in the chat box. Net cash provided. So it's this top section. How much cash did Boeing generate in the first 9 months of their first 9 months? How much cash did they generate? Right there, guys. Now, by way of reminder, what do we want that to do? Remember, it's the difference between all the cash that comes in minus all the cash that goes out. What do we want that to do? Positive or negative? First off. Absolutely positive every time. And then we want it to be going up. It's negative, and it got worse negative. Why? Because their 737 is sitting on the ground. They can't sell it. They couldn't sell it until November 18th of this year. They're estimating, if I remember correctly, around 25 to 30 planes will be delivered by year end. Of course, next year you'll see much bigger delivery. But getting that cash in is going to be vitally important to them. So that's the number, $14.4 billion negative cash flow, not a positive number. Okay, so let's do the next one, total revenue. What statement am I going to? You guys are getting good at this. What statement do I go to now? Income statement. So let's jump to that income statement. I need my total revenue number. Let's start with the 3 months. Let's just do the 3-month number. So how much was their total revenue in the first 9 months, or excuse me, in the 3 months ending September 30th? Absolutely, right there. Make sure you get that total revenue. That's the number. There we go. Now I want to get the net income, which I'm also going to find on the income statement. So let's go get that number. Again, we're looking at the 3 months ending in September 30th of this year. How much did they generate in net loss? There you go, $449 million loss. We've got those numbers. Well, guess what? Because you've done number 3 and number 4, you've got our first calculation. I'm going to take this number. I got the 449 negative minus the 14,139. Grab your calculator and see if you can get that. What's the percentage? Give me the percentage. While you're doing that, I'll look at the question here. A great question. Kasha is kind of asking, can we generate free cash flow from that statement, meaning the cash flow statement? Absolutely can. And as people get this percent here, there you go, multiply by 100. Let's see if we got it. So we got kind of this 3.1817. I rounded up to 3.2. It's a loss. What that says is for every $100 they brought in revenue in 2020, they generated $3.20 loss. Now, you don't like that, but we know why and what happened as we deal with a huge global pandemic and the 737 MAX. Going back to the question, though, let me go back to the statement. You absolutely can calculate free cash flow from that statement. And here's how you get to it. You're going to take your cash from operation. Oh, wrong statement. Let me go back to the right statement here. Where was I on that statement? Oh, yes, the cash flow statement. That's the one I'm trying to get to. Where's my cash flow statement? Right there. There's the cash flow statement. To answer your question, calculation for free cash flow. Net cash provided by operations minus what is known as capital expenditures. Here, they call it property, plant, and equipment additions. This is also known as CAP or capital expenditures. Take those two out. That's the most common calculation. That's how you get your free cash flow. Let me know if that answers your question, Kasha. Good question there. Okay, so that's the tool. That's how you use it. It's not rocket science, guys. We did in, 6 minutes or so? We did 5 of them fairly quickly. Now, if your question, so what does that mean? Take net profit, jump into Google and say, okay, what is net profit again? What does that tell me, et cetera? Well, here's the rest of the numbers. I filled it out for Q3 of 2020, and then there's a comparison side where I put in, well, how did they do Q3 of last year? Now, sometimes you might want to say, well, there's so much different in 2020. Maybe instead of Q3 2020 to Q3 2019, I might want to do Q3 2020 to Q2 of 2020. See if we're improving because it's been such a tough year. But there's the numbers. Obviously very down because of the impacts of COVID-19 and the 736 grounding. Well, you can also do it for 9 months. So here's the same numbers, but we're looking at the full 9 months, not just a quarter. We're looking at the full 9 months. Again, you'll see growth numbers are down dramatically as we deal with the pandemic implications. All of our numbers are not very good, to be quite honest, at Boeing in 2020. It's been absolutely a tough year. You take those numbers, you can also do it and look at it from a competitor perspective. How did Boeing versus Airbus? First of all, you'll notice they all have negative cash flow. That suggests the whole industry is getting impacted. Now, of course, numbers are a little different based upon Airbus's products versus Boeing's, et cetera. But in the end, both of them have been real tough. The last thing I'd suggest, you can use this to compare against just any other company. Last month, we looked at Pfizer. And so you look at, here's kind of Boeing versus Pfizer and what the implications are there. Of course, profitability on Pfizer is much greater than what you're seeing in Boeing. And of course, as they now get the vaccination out, you'll start to see those numbers improve as well. Well, folks, that's the analyze phase. A lot of information in there. Don't get intimidated, though. It's pretty simple. Listen to the call, answer 4 questions. Go do the calculations. If you don't remember what they are, kind of go back and search out what those metrics mean. But as you start to do this quarter over quarter, you can see if we're getting better or not. And that's the real goal there. Okay, so we're to our last step, and that's to apply. To know and not to do is not to know. If you take this information, you got all that data, you don't do anything with it, you've wasted your time. So let me walk you through our application process. Pretty simple. It's 3 steps. The first thing is this. What new insights did you gain as a result of your analysis? I've already hit a lot of those. Boy, this impact on the 737 MAX, I knew they were grounded, but I didn't know the impact, and it's been huge. Of course, the impact of COVID-19, I knew it was going to be down, but they're saying 3 years before they get through that recovery. Risk at play with Boeing, Airbus, and airlines, et cetera. What's the real risk there? There's some real risk here, at least in the next few years. And then fear impacting travel industry. That was an insight I realized through the call, is that it's probably the most safe it's ever been as an industry. But because of the pandemic, because of what happened with their 737, people are fearful of travel and concerned about travel. So that's going to have an impact. So those are some of the key insights that I took away. Well, the next thing is the real application. So based upon that, what are you going to do differently based upon that? Now, if that's your own company, you're saying, okay, so how can I help impact these key drivers that our executives are talking about? If it's a competitor, how can I differentiate ourselves? If it's a customer, how can I become that trusted partner? In my case, is a company that does training. One is I think I want to support the travel industry. I need to get out and do some traveling. We do a lot of traveling in our industry, although this year we didn't do as much. I've got a lot of points. I need to go out and use those and help that industry. I mean, it's something that I've always loved, traveling. And boy, I want to help see that kind of turn around. Track results of Boeing. I think it's going to become a great case study. I'm sure Harvard's already working on it. Here at Acumen Learning, maybe that becomes one of our case studies that we make available. Where they were before the 737 and then combining it with the COVID-19. How has that impacted that business, that industry, et cetera? I think that would be an interesting case study. And then, of course, because I'm in the training industry, I want to share this with my team members as well as clients to see. It's very interesting. For those that have come to multiple sessions, you've seen everything from Amazon that's just crushing it to Boeing that's struggling to stay alive in this last few. And it's great just to see how this pandemic, we all know it's impacting us individually. We all know it's impacting the economy, but to see how different industries are dealing with it is quite useful, I think. So the last step is this. Once you've gone through that process, the goal of this whole experience is to go have a conversation. If you analyze your own company, my recommendation is to have a conversation with your manager. Share what you shared, share your actions, the things you want to do. Make sure you're aligned with your manager. If you analyze a customer, sit down with the sales team and say, how can we become a more trusted partner? If you're in sales, look at the companies you work with and say, how can I partner with them, help them with their goals and objectives? And then if you're analyzing a competitor, how can we differentiate ourselves? Use this information to help us put ourselves at the right place, at the right time, with the right execution. Well, folks, that is the process. Prepare, analyze, and apply. You may recall we had a second step, locate the call or transcript. And then there was a second step. If you listened to these before, you're supposed to do something and then meet with your team. Do you remember what that was? is to review your notes. Guys, what we just walked through, that tool are the notes that you review. So imagine you've done this for this quarter, and then year end, it's going to be out here in January, February. Review it then and see what happened with that company. You do that 2 or 3 times again, I guarantee you'll have a better understanding of this. But now all of a sudden you have a tool that helps you say, okay, last month we said we'd do this. Let's see how we actually did. So start tracking those, etc. Well, folks, as we get through this last part here, let me just share with you one last polling question. Your challenge. I want to give you a challenge, and the challenge is this. Which are you going to look at? Just put this in the chat box. What company are you going to analyze? A company you work for, a company you sell to, a company you compete against, a company you invest in, or just a company you're interested in? I'd love to hear, who are you going to analyze? That's the goal of this. Let's get you to actually use the tool. Excellent. Well, I need to get you that tool then. And before we do that, just a quick introduction to Acumen Learning. Many of you are participants or familiar with. For those that aren't, we're part of a company called Acumen Learning. We help employees understand how their companies make money and how to make good decisions around that. We've been in business for 18 years working with great companies. We do live sessions, we do virtual sessions, and right now we've got a great online self-paced program that you might be interested in. We've got a great opportunity working with great companies, 30 of the Fortune 50. Some of you are customers of ours, and years ago we had a company, unbeknownst to us, do an assessment on how effective it was. How effective are programs? And here's some of the results. 84% said they improved their performance in business and function. 81% of those who took the survey said it increased their collaboration, improved their upward communication, improved employee engagement, increased business focus, and improved teamwork. For those of you who've done this program, which of those are the ones you saw benefits? A, B, C, D, through F. What did you get out of our program? Put it in there so it helps others see what the benefits you saw. Folks, if you're interested in learning more, I've got a website that's going to give you everything you need, okay? The website is this, acumenlearning.com/webinar. It's going to give you access to 3 things. Number 1, we have for those that participate, if you want a deeper dive or maybe you want a refresher on this program, we've got that self-paced online. It's 13 different modules. You can do it at your own space. It's very interactive. You want to have a greater understanding to build upon I highly recommend it. You'll get a coupon code that reduces the price by $100. In addition, at that same website, you'll get access to the workbook. The last thing I need from you is your feedback. What company should we look at in 2021? As you go to acumenlearning.com/webinar, there's a place for you to put that in. What company? We look at that, and that's why we did Boeing, by the way. Enough of you talked about it, we decided to do Boeing. So please do that. Go to that website. And then for those that are new to us, if you want to talk to one of our representatives in that same webinar link, you can make that request, and we'll reach out to you. Folks, it's truly been a pleasure. We're at the top of the hour. Thank you so much for your time. Let's I'll stay on if there's any additional questions. If not, just go ahead and exit the meeting and we'll start wrapping up. Thank you much. If you happen to put a question in that we didn't answer, one of my colleagues here at Acumen Learning did not answer, please just put that in the chat or so we can kind of help you with that. There's the link on that. We've got a link in there for you. acumenlearning.com/webinars, where you go. Okay, at what point does a company take the cash they have and invest? Sorry, it just scrolled on me. Invest to grow their business. Great question, Mike. The challenge that they face, it's about opportunity. It's about what's going on externally to the market. For them right now at Boeing, they've got their projects, their long-term projects, they're continuing investing. But new projects right now, because cash is such a big deal to them, they're holding back. So outside of a global pandemic, they have a whole capital allocation process where they look at their strategy. Then they look at financial performance. What sort of return could I get on a specific project? Versus, think of it like this, Mike. It's like they've got a big pie of money, and they've got to start slicing it up. So they have a very distinct process, capital allocation process, where they look at stuff like net present value, hurdle rates, et cetera, to get a quantitative. But they also look at the qualitative. How does it fit with our strategy? How does it fit with the opportunities? Of all the opportunities I can spend my money, what are the top ones I need to look at? So as far as like a trigger of a certain dollar amount, investors, if they feel like you got too much, they'll start pressuring you. But companies are always looking at potential future opportunities. Let me know if that answers your question. Okay, you go to this website here on the question of where's that tool. If you go to www.acumenlearning.com webinar, it's in the chat box. Click on that, and that's where you can access the tool, as well as the discount on the self-paced, and then tell us where, if you want to, what other companies we should look at. Oh, looks like we got that answer. Thank you, Ginger. Did you cover Apple in the past? We have not covered Apple. Apple is one that is actually a client of ours. And so obviously we have contractual relationships on clients. We want to be careful of that. But we have not done Apple. Maybe in the future we'll look at that. Companies that we've done recently would be ExxonMobil, Tesla, Amazon, Pfizer, Boeing. I think those are the ones that we've done the most recent. And every month we're looking at a different one. Let's see. What's driving their stock price up? Boy, Brooklyn, if I had that answer, you would pay to come to me. I would not have a fancy island. If I could predict what's causing it to come, well, obviously they're down. The real question: what might drive a company stock price up? The whole reason a stock's going to increase is based upon the future potential of that company. Where do we see the future looking like? Now, in a downturn, as it drops, everybody's trying to get out. Eventually, you hit a trough. And when they think the trough is, again, when do you want to buy? You buy low, you sell high. Even though sometimes in my portfolio, it feels like I buy low, sell high, or I buy high, sell low. But so as companies start to come out of the pandemic, you're going to see, for example, in the oil and gas industry, earlier this year, everything was dropping dramatically. And they're still down quite a bit from where they were pre-COVID. But you're starting to see, as oil prices kind of hovered around $40 a barrel, you're starting to see some upticks. What it's saying is the market's starting to say, okay, are we really as a vaccine comes out, as these other things, are we on the other side of it? So I want to get in when it's down, and I'll start to see it increase. Right now, PE ratios and a lot of that stuff is difficult because they got negative earnings per share. So it's hard to kind of look at some of what they call technical trading. It's more the fundamentals of their business. Do we see an opportunity in the future? So let me know if that answers your question. What else do we got here? The airlines industry, given the COVID situation, what drivers should become a priority between cash and profit? The question there, I think, Mike, you may have pulled that forward. Right now, if they're like Boeing, they've got $26 billion of cash on there, you'll start seeing them working more towards profitability. But cash, so again, it's like you in your personal life. If you happen to have a significant other or yourself, if you lose your job, how much emphasis do you have on cash? Well, you're not going out to eat as much. You're trying to be as careful as you can. But once you get a good amount of cash, then you start having time to look at other stages. Now that Boeing's starting to deliver, hopefully they're going to start looking at profitability starting to rise. But I think they're going to have at least a year to 18 months where cash will still be a priority. As they start to burn through some of that cash, do we have enough to keep withstanding until we start getting that cash flow positive again? Let me know if that answers your question. Let's see here. Mike and others, my team, let's see. How does furlough affect businesses long-term? Furloughing an individual, depending on how they set that up. The most common furlough, as I understand it, and others may be able to correct me if I'm wrong, is that basically they're kind of holding a job, but they're not paying you on that furlough. If they're paying you, of course, that's going to impact their cash during the furlough period. But often what a furlough is, they're basically saying, look, we're going to furlough you which allows you to draw not Social Security, unemployment, with the idea that once we get on the other side, we can start hiring people back. So for them, in the short term, it's going to reduce their cash usage as they put people on furlough, which, again, if you're in a tough time, and one of the big challenges with them is it's not just going to be furlough. Many of those, they started with like early retirement, voluntary separation. What they're doing there is they're saying, look, if you got early, let's kind of lessen our future potential. But as you think about it, if really the reduction is as bad as they're talking about, they don't need the capacity of building of airplanes that they once had. And so that's going to have some long-term. In fact, I think by the end of 2021, they're anticipating their total headcount will be about 130 thousand employees. That's still down 23,000 from where they were pre. I think it's that 153 million. I'll have to remember where we got that. Excuse me, 153,000. Can't remember exactly what date we got that, but I know this year they have 26,000 employees that were given severance this year. Let me know if that answers your question. Does the Wall Street view Boeing as a growth stock or a value stock? You know what, Jay? I probably should have checked that before I jumped on. I didn't look at that. Does anybody else know what the market's saying, what the predictions are? I could look it up, but in the interest of time, I'll hold off on that. Where can I get to see the big picture? I don't know. Does somebody answer that? You can do that through Google, not Google. What am I thinking? Amazon. Amazon's a great place to access that book. Obviously, going through a course. If your company has a course, you get that as part of the course. So that's a great way. If you do the online program, you're going to review the book, so you get some exposure that way as well. Let me know if that asks. It looks like we got somebody answering that. Team, are there questions that I missed? Just trying. We had so many on the call. They've kind of scrolled around. It looks like you guys are answering some questions. There are questions I missed that we need to. Oh, I think this question that was answered there, I think is good. Somebody's asking about previous recordings. Can we see this? And yes, we do have that. And we gave a link to that so you can access those. It's Acumen Learning /recording, I think. Oh, there it is. It's up at the top there. 10:07. Ginger put it in there. Thank you, Ginger. Yeah, great question on the 737. So yes, so they've got all the fixes in place. It was waiting for the return to service certificate from the FAA on that 737. So like I said, they had 450 airplanes that were sitting in inventory. I don't know where they were. Be interesting. 450 airplanes. That's quite a bit. So yes, as of the 18th of this year, they have taken off the. So anybody who has the 737, assuming they've gone through the rewiring or the all the things they did to fix the problems they had, they're no longer grounded. And so how many of those are existing like at a Delta or United already happening? All I know is as of just today or yesterday, Wall Street Journal announced that United took the first ones out of inventory. So they are in process. It's just it's been sitting for 18 months. Thanks to the client, we're on it. We have a rep reach out. Excellent. So that looks like. Okay, let's see. Still have a decent sized group. Happy to stay on for a few more minutes. If not, just get off. Go ahead and exit. That's how we know we'll close it out. Just by way of reminder, this website here, acumenlearning.com. Ginger, if you have that, let's go ahead and put that in there just in case somebody stepped away and doesn't have that. That's a great resource. It's going to give you access to our Seeing the Big Picture online training, which covers a lot of the content in our Seeing the Big Picture book. It's a great learning experience. Highly recommend that for kind of your self-development or even a team if you want to do that. If you go to the website, you can get a coupon code that gives you $100 off. Of course, the workbook for what we walked through today, that is available at that website as well. And then two things. If you're interested in having one of us reach out and share our services, what we can do and help your teams, there's a place for that at that link. And then, of course, give us any feedback as to who we should look at in our next call, which will be January 21st. Ginger and team, is there any questions that we missed that we need to go back to, or you feel like we got what we needed to do there? It's great to have you. Thank you as well. Well, folks, I'm not seeing very many questions. We had great involvement, great engagement. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, as we part ways, have a great holiday season as we kind of end the year. Please be safe and As we look at this, we'll look to see you January 21st if you can make it back. Again, to get access to the resource, the tools, the program, please go to acumenlearning.com/webinar. And feel free, share this with others. This is open to anybody. Our goal here at Acumen Learning is to build a business understanding of everybody. How can we help employees understand these things to help them succeed in their roles? With that being said, happy holidays to you and yours. Ginger, if there's anything else you have, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to shut this down. Okay, folks, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here.